The clips in this video are taken from my video OCD1 scrap stool, which I recommend you check out. But please enjoy learning how to use the lathe. To turn on the lathe, we need to find a center point. The easiest way to find a center point on a regular object like a square or rectangle is by diagonals. So let us bring you down to the top. You can see here, top of our timber. All we're going to do is get a ruler and go from point to point on the corner. So I'm just guesstimating because this corner is a bit wrong. Just like that. Just like that. And that then is your center point. And you need a center point for a lathe, because lathes work up the center. So, this is my lathe. It's a really old record power. Not quite as old as this guy who's hidden in here, which is a treadle lathe, which you used to use with your feet. I used to have a piece of documentation about that. By used to, I mean I literally moved it out of my way like 4 or 5 seconds ago. Ah, here we go. So yes, you used to work off a foot powered treadle lathe. This is actually our first lathe that we ran off a washing machine motor. Super safe, not in the least bit dangerous. Anyway, so basically for the lathe, on a lathe you have the powered end here, which is what's known as your live center, because it spins, and again that's driven into the center point there. And on this end you have your dead center, same thing. The dead center is dead inside. Its parents didn't love it. No, the dead center doesn't move. So the keys for turning is be very careful. You always want to be coming in just slightly below the midpoint with your turning tools, and always use turning chisels, which have really long handles and give you a good grip. Or if you're like me and you own tools in the Victorian era, make yourself an extension handle for a chisel that has steel that's better than any steel you'll ever buy. Didn't buy this, it's my great grandfather's. The chisel, not the extension. I made the extension. This is where safety first is super important. You do not want loose clothing or long hair near this machine, because it will, as it rotates, I'll turn on and show you. So it rotates at a fair old lick. So it can grab your hair, whatever you're holding, and drag you in. Not very pleasant. So short sleeves, sleeves rolled up. I will knot these and put them inside my jacket because I don't want to get pulled into it. And of course I have my beard, knotted, tied up, so it cannot get pulled in. Also, just general, take the rings off. Ring avulsions, not fun, kids. But yeah, we're ready to go. And safety glasses and such. Face shield is also good depending on what you're using, but safety glasses definitely. And ear defenders, of course. So just switching over to my other lathe to point out a few other things just about mounting and setting up to put the piece in. I have your X mark, so what you want to do is to find your center. I'm going to use a bradawl here, but you can use a nail or a screw, whatever, just to get in that. I went a little bit off center there, but you want to get in that center point and just make sure it's nice and defined. Now you can then take a compass, if you know the size you want to work to, mark it with your compass, and then plane off that material. Do the same on both ends. That'll reduce the amount of work you have to do on the lathe, the amount of material you have to take off. Now, for softwood, it's fine to turn from square, but for hardwoods, particularly really hardwoods like mahogany or teak, I would always remove as much waste as I could before I got to the turning. So what you can do with these X marks is the dead center is often known as a spur center. This one is actually a much more pronounced spur center. So those X marks, you can cut them with a saw, and that'll give a place for these spurs to go into. But either way, what you're going to need to do is put it into your point and then drive it home with the hammer. Don't go mad here, you'll break your lathe. By doing that, you get these spurs to go into the end of your timber, so it has a grip. Right, you have that set up. You set that up where it needs to be. Then bring in your dead center. I'm going to set it up so that it's just a few mil free, so you can draw it back and take it out to check. And then you're just going to bring it in. So I'm happy there'll be enough travel on that. Just going to lock down my dead center and then advance it. Get it in till it feels nice and comfortable, and you're sure that it's fully bedded on the right hand side or on the dead center or the live center. Then lock in your dead center. Now there's several ways of doing this. Some have a little arm. This one happens to have a nut. This dead center is very handy because it actually runs on a bearing, which reduces burning at the end here. So that's your piece in the lathe. Now to go to the tips on how to turn safely. You always want to do a few quick test spins before you start to make sure that those centers are right. You'll know straight away when it's wobbling that it's not right, and get it as good as you can. As I said a moment ago, much of the material can be removed before you start turning, but when turning from square, the key is to work your way very slowly, making that piece as even as possible, reducing the amount of potential wobble and such. I'm just using a regular wide gouge here. Just take the edges off, and you'll see I work my way across until I get around, and then I move my tool over to ensure that I have everything down to a round shape. This is especially an issue if you're working with, let's say, firewood or something, where you're getting something that's already half inch round, or an oblong piece. The key is to make it as stable as possible, as quick as possible. So as soon as I have it down, I move over my tool rest and get the rest of the timber in a round. You'll notice earlier I used flat tool to take some of the material off to get it down to the round. But when you're starting out, you can just use the gouge. When I have all this roughed out with the gouge, I go back over it with my straight cutting tool to get it smooth and in the round. You can kind of see as it turns, you can see the grooves there, but that's what gets you there. But one of the keys to safe turning is to cut with as little pressure as possible. If you push too hard, you can get what's known as a catch, which is where the chisel will dig into the turning material and stop the material turning. This is extremely scary, but very rarely is dangerous. But if you are turning a piece that is wider or of a heavier stock, I recommend upgrading those safety glasses to a face shield in case something does eject. It's very rare it happens, but you don't want to be there at the time it does. This is now in the round, and when you have it in the round, you can do all the shaping you want and then finish up with a bit of sanding, and you have a finished product. You can see as I was marking this out, I made a line with a pencil and then introduced that pencil as it's spinning. This is a great way to get your marks in, and then you can see them when you're turning. If you want to see how this turns out, watch my video. So this example piece is pretty much already, so it's time for sanding. I would recommend sanding the way I'm showing here. Take out the tool rest and sand from the underside. The lathe turns towards you, so if it gets pulled away, the sandpaper will get pulled in the wall, you won't get pulled over the top. And when I've sanded it on the underside and it's stopped, you'll see here again when it stops, I just sand along the grain. What can happen is you can end up with deep grooves from the underside sanding, and just work your way up through the grits until you get to a nice fine grit. I think I stopped here at 180 or 240, but again you can see that from the underside and then along the grain with the machine stopped. So all that's left then is to burnish and finish. In this case I stained it before I burnished it. Burnishing is
as old as turning itself. Basically, what you do is you get the sawdust from the turning, and using it like you use the sandpaper pad, you run it along the timber as it spins. This causes the timber to become polished, basically because the density of both the timber and the shavings are the same, and it creates a great finish. You can see here I just grabbed a fistful of the sawdust and I'm just going to rub it along and polish it out. You can see the shine there on the timber as it spins from the burnishing. After this, then you can put on your surface finish, whether it's an oil or lacquer or whatever. Super glue actually works really well, but that's a very advanced technique. But yeah, I mean, just get out there, have fun. Wood turning is the most fun you can have with your clothes on. No joke.